G'day, Derrick. Thanks for joining me on this call where we're going to be speaking about VMware exit strategies.
Nice to see you, Ross. This is going to be awesome.
A problem that we're seeing enterprises run into right now are they're looking for alternatives to VMware. We've heard the stories where they are getting hit up with three to five times increases in their renewals and their licenses, and they're posed with this challenge. Is it time to move off VMware and find an alternative? Which then leads to a number of other questions around, is it time for modernization? What are they going to do to try and avoid running into this situation again? And, what are they going to build their future applications on? What's that foundation going to be on? So, Derrick, I'm curious from your perspective, what are the major virtualization migration paths companies are choosing today?
So the easiest answer, obviously, is replatforming. Some people are just choosing to pick another platform and then trying to target new environments. A lot of them are choosing cloud because they're already going there anyways, and so they're just further adopting what they're already using. Some companies are, and many companies are needing to maintain an on-premise footprint, and so they are considering different on-premise alternatives. And then some companies are doing a combination of either refactoring into a containerization approach and getting out of VMs entirely, or kind of doing it in the slew where they're moving maybe initially some of their workloads that are containerized over and then moving VMs with the plan of converting them down the road.
And what platforms are they looking at? What are you seeing folks move to?
So what I'm seeing is maybe a little bit different than what is potentially people are looking at. People are looking at all kinds of things. They're looking at OpenStack. They're looking again at cloud providers, AWS, Azure, GCP. They're looking at Nutanix. They're obviously looking at, I think, OpenShift Virt as one of the big new players in the space, especially given the momentum they've had in the Linux industry and their history with KVM. So different various KVM providers they're looking at. They're looking at some more open source, do it yourself type situations. Everybody, I think, is considering a whole host of different options. Where they're landing more often than not, I would say most commonly that I'm hearing is either cloud, OpenShift Virt, or Nutanix. That's traditionally what I've seen ultimately.
So what are some of the considerations, for cloud first versus on-prem or a hybrid environment?
Well, cloud first is really more if you're already a neighbor of the cloud, like you're already using it in some capacity, it just becomes an easy segue answer to the question of what do I do with the raising costs of Broadcom? But I think it only, if you go to a singular cloud versus various clouds, you're buying yourself into the exact same problem all over again, where it's going to be really hard to move in the future should you need to. Modernization and not going cloud first is a whole other ballgame because it's a huge investment up front. Down the road, it will pay in dividends, especially if you're being mindful of how you construct yourself so you can move agilely from one environment to another. And then mixed environments, I think, is what is traditionally what we're seeing more often than not. People are very rarely going, I'm going all in with refactoring just because it's so much so fast and they have to keep up with daily operations. They're usually migrating a series of workloads just as they are lift and shift into these new environments and then kind of starting making themselves cloud native or container native as time goes on to be more effective with what they're using. So that way, again, not only are they not married to their environments, but they can scale more effectively in the future. It's just hard to make that jump really fast.
So what's an example of a customer that you've worked with and how they navigated this question and what did they end up doing?
Um, so there's a bunch of different customers I've worked with. Different customers have different outcomes depending upon what it is they're trying to achieve. Some customers, like I said, are very do-it-yourself. I've seen it go all different ways. The most common prevalent we're running into right now is customers that are going to OpenShift and OpenShift Vert. They're a little apprehensive initially, but they're eager to consider it because they're looking for an alternative. The reason they start considering its possibility is when they start seeing the number of integrations that have gone that direction, how much, industry pressure is going that way, Red Hat's momentum with how they're adding new features into the platform to become more, virtual machine VMware like in some ways. And just how robust the platform is because it's been around as an ecosystem platform, not just for virtualization, but for containers in general. It's been around for like 14 years. And so it's got a long-standing history, and Red Hat's had a long-standing history with virtualization in general. I just met the CTO the other day of Red Hat who was involved with the creation of KVM. And that is probably the most common competitor to ESXi, which is what VMware was built on. And so to know you're working not only in a different virtualization space with an enterprise solution, but with the people that created KVM as an alternative to ESXi, I think shows a lot of promise. And people are willing to not only make the move, but they're also willing to make the move because the brand name. I mean, no one's going to get in trouble for saying, I tried Red Hat and IBM. So that's probably the best that I would say is the direction that I've seen customers go.
And what are some examples of those maybe new features or integrations that they're building out? Does anything come to mind that's sort of really wowed you?
So there's a whole host of different things. Like, for example, the things that have wowed me have been like their migration toolkit, how they can bring VMs over pretty seamlessly. Their migration factory, which combines their migration toolkit with Ansible to move VMs in different groupings and pairs and kind of in different slews to make the migration path go a lot faster. That's one big thing. Another big thing is how closely, tightly partnered they are with the ecosystem of storage vendors. If you even go back as little as 2 years ago, the number of storage vendors that could do OpenShift Virt was much, much, much smaller than it even has been in the last couple of months. There's been a massive uptick, and I think it's because everybody wants an opportunity to participate in what Red Hat's doing uniquely in this space. And so we're seeing a humongous adoption of storage vendors to try and make OpenShift Virt a first-class citizen for the different storage providers that are out there. So that's been really cool to see. And then it's the things that we're seeing just in terms of how fast Red Hat is iterating. Their major release cycle is every 6 months for their platform, and they're pushing out they're listening directly to customers and pushing out brand new features to meet their needs extremely, extremely quickly. And they're very transparent about what's coming out in terms of hey, customers have been asking for the ability to be able to visualize what features they have inside of OVE versus what's completely in OCP. And they were like, okay, that's one of the features we're adding next is we're trying to make it more apparent. Customers go, I really want to have more of a VMware feel to how I manage the VMs. Okay, that's the next thing that we're adding. They're very, very good at taking customer feedback and applying that directly to the platform.
That's good to hear. Now, you're speaking about an open ecosystem. Red Hat bills itself as, open source. What's a misconception you often hear, and how do you help customers get past it?
I think the biggest thing is people think that because OpenShift is a proprietary version of Kubernetes, they think that they're walking into the same vendor lock-in as they were with something else. I think you could argue you could get vendor locked in through it, but the way you get stuck in vendor lock-in is more by how you use the tool than the tool itself. OpenShift is built on Kubernetes native constructs. There's almost nothing different in terms of the underpinning of the system between one Kubernetes distribution and another. What's different is the workflow management and the uniqueness of things that they've added to make the experience more seamless. OpenShift GitOps is just Argo CD. OADP is just Valero. OpenShift, what's it called? I'm being stupid right now. OpenShift's CI platform is Tecton. They have all this host of different things. Service Mesh is Istio, though it's their own flavor version of Istio. It's all open source tooling. What they're doing is they're making the integrations easier and more seamless. I think where people get wrapped around the axle is they think because I've laid into OpenShift, I'm now marrying up to that. And I would say not only is that purely speculative and you're basing it off of probably some bad feelings you might have because of what happened with CentOS and what went down with RHEL in the transition there. But I think a lot of it's fear, uncertainty, and doubt about what this solution ends up painting the picture of. And ultimately, people that go to OpenShift end up being Kubernetes experts. Yes, they have a particular view of how OpenShift does it. And in fact, they end up usually staying with OpenShift. But it's not because they're vendor locked in. It's because the support angle is so good. Their knowledge base articles are so good. The platform is highly stable. And ultimately, it enables them to be hybrid cloud enabled, right? You're not stuck in OpenShift on your bare metal, because OpenShift bare metal in VMware, in Azure, in AWS, it's all the same platform. So you become more infrastructure agile and you separate yourself away from the actual underpinnings of being locked into something, but you stay because you like it. So,
So, say a customer is looking to make this move to OpenShift virtualization. What changes in automation are necessary to make this transition? Like, what are some of the considerations
yeah.
that need to be made during the process?
I think it depends on the automation technology you're using, but a lot of people are using things like Terraform. They're using Ansible. All these things are great tools. CI/CD platforms are good, but many times there's going to be some changes. For example, if you're a Terraform user, the Terraform providers you're leveraging against VMware or whatever environment you are, they're going to have to change for a OpenShift native or Kubernetes centric one. Now, I think there's a lot of momentum that's going to be growing there immensely, especially now that IBM owns the platform, Terraform that is, and they own Red Hat. I only see a tighter integration happening there and making it more seamless to kind of reduce that noise. But where you see a bigger dividends is you can now marry yourself to the same type of CI/CD workflows you're using for containers as you use for VMs. So there's a change that occurs, but you're actually reducing technical debt and you're reducing tool sprawl by simplifying yourself down to the one tool set you use for both containers and VMs rather than using two separate things to do two separate jobs.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. So, Shadowsoft, we've been a Red Hat partner for 17 plus years. We've been working with OpenShift for 10 plus years. I know you wrote a blog post on OpenShift in 2013 that I always like to mention. Uh, but tell me a bit about the Red Hat and the Shadowsoft partnership, and our experience in virtualization.
Yeah, so we have a long-standing partnership. We've been a Red Hat partner for 17 years. I think you made mention of that. As an ecosystem partner, my first usage of OpenShift was in OpenShift 2. It wasn't even Kubernetes based yet, and that's what the company's was as well. I actually got brought over into the company about 11 and a half years ago because of my background with JBoss, which is their middleware portfolio, and a little bit of background with their OpenShift platform, as well as with being a big Java developer. And really, our main purpose as a business for the first couple of years was just reselling Red Hat software. And as time went on, we started to become a consulting shop. I came on board and that only kind of it kept expanding and evolving and growing. And a lot of that initially over the first several years was very DevOps centric. So a lot of that was Terraform, a lot of that was Ansible, some of the older configuration management solutions that are out there as well. We were foundation partners with Docker. But as time went on, and people started adopting OpenShift and Kubernetes, we started evolving as a business in terms of what are the challenges that people were facing. I think our first toes into the KVM space as a business from a consultative perspective, I want to say was in 2019 maybe. We were doing work around Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization pretty heavily for a couple of different customers. And then over time, we kept doing more work with it. We saw the evolution of where OpenStack went. We've since done OpenStack engagements for Red Hat. or on behalf of Red Hat for Red Hat clients. And then we started doing a lot more OpenShift Vert work as time went on because we already had this huge pedigree with the Rev section with KVM, a little bit with the OpenStack side, but more immensely on the OpenShift side. OpenShift really is the foundation for how OpenShift Vert works. It just takes the functionality of KVM and puts it into a pod inside of OpenShift. So all the same tooling that OpenShift leverages to manage containers, it uses to manage VMs. So that 12-ish years of OpenShift ecosystem background that the company has had really just went, oh, okay, we're just going to take it and apply it to the VM side of things. And I think that gave us a big leg up compared to other people because not only were most people not really that deep in Kubernetes, but they haven't really traditionally been that big or deep into OpenShift. And so we were particularly in a good position to make this something that is a part of the workflow that we do for customers on a regular basis.
And what does a typical engagement model look like with Shadowsoft?
So the technical engagement model is usually a three-step process. We're usually doing things like assessing a customer, looking at what their needs are today, how they're currently leveraging their different platforms. Some people come into us in the middle of their roadmap. Some people at the very beginning of their journey. Everyone's a little bit different in that regard. And so we want to get a feel of where a customer is looking at for the future as where they are right now. And then build out an 18-month-ish, 12 to 18-month roadmap to figure out, hey, this is where they're going. This is why they're going that direction. And these are the design considerations they're going to have to make. After that, we really lean more into an implementation phase where we're helping them prove concept systems out, build out pilot systems, expand into like smaller production footprints, and then coach customers on how to leverage the technology and move forward. At which point we come in for more of like an enablement side of things, which is ultimately lending credence to when they hit new tough challenges. Maybe they're accomplishing disaster recovery and backup segments. Maybe they're bringing in service mesh. Maybe they're just doing something more from a supportive angle. We've added all these integrations and we don't know how they all work and marry up. Can you, Shadowsoft, help come in and help direct and guide us around that? We then take on kind of more of a supportive arm in that regard of doing either small projects around these different challenging areas or giving them a second person to phone up to answer their questions and help guide them through these new unique challenges that we either have faced or maybe we're new to facing it, but we have a lot of experience to help them get through.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of experience, we've done a number of these OpenShift Vert migrations now. What are some of the benefits that customers are seeing now that they've migrated?
I think that one's it's in some ways easy to say, in other ways hard to say. The one thing is they've got Broadcom off their back. And so they're a little bit more in control of their destiny. I also think there's something to be said more about future state where they're now playing in a Kubernetes ecosystem. And so it's immediately they're being trained on a new way of doing things, which is going to open the door for them, whether they've gone the direction or not, for containers or application modernization, refactoring. And again, that ability to be infrastructure agile in the future. So there's a lot of things I think that are things that customers are slowly starting to perceive as they use those types of platforms. But I think what I would say as an asterisk to that is because people have been only adopting OpenShift Vert heavily for the last, say, 7-8 months, somewhere in that time frame, 9-10 months, really like 10 months, I think we haven't seen the dividends pay off yet, but it's coming. Because all the customers, I think, can see the vision of where it's going to go once they start playing with it, but they haven't had enough time to mature into it yet. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess one thing that we really speak to around this move is it's not just about moving the VMs into a new platform. It's really, a springboard for innovation, for modernization, for moving to containers and being able to take advantage of the benefits that come with that. How are you seeing customers, approach this migration? Are they using it as this springboard? Any thoughts there?
I don't think they are yet. We've really run into two different customers types when it comes to this. Customer A is the most of them. We're on VMware. We're not really a big container shop yet. We just want to get off VMware. Those people aren't Springboard Platinum. They're really just getting off, at least for now. And I think as they use it more, they'll open the idea more to what they could actually use it for ultimately. Customer 2 is the complete and utter opposite. We've been using containers. In fact, we've been using OpenShift for a number of years. And this is just the next evolution of getting other things out of VMware and into this platform. Those customers, they're not springboarding because they've already been sprung, so to speak, right? So for them, I think they're just more excited for the opportunity to reduce tool sprawl almost more than anything else and reduce skill competency set down just to one thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of big benefits there for sure. So, how about looking into the future? What are some emerging trends that you're seeing? You know, what do you see this landscape looking like in 12, 24 months?
Ooh, emerging trends and landscape changes. Couple of things, maybe. Just the first thing off the top of my head that comes to mind is, again, how much adoption we've seen with storage vendors and all these other platforms. I think right now it's brass tacks. Let's just get our storage solutions to handle things the way that they handle them in VMware, right? And there's power in that, in the sense that getting equivalency skill set is definitely going to matter. And I think as time goes on, we're going to see more and more capability sets come over that just marry up. But I think what stage 2 looks like, which is probably more in the 24-month to 36-month window, is going beyond what VMware was doing. VMware, because of the way it was designed, I don't think it had some of the same capacities. And look, I'm not a VMware expert. I wasn't a VMware engineer. I was a developer and security guy who became a OpenShift guy and Kubernetes guy who then became a automation cloud Kubernetes OpenShift guy, right? So just bear with me on this. But I think what I've seen from VMware that I have, or what I've seen in OpenShift that I haven't seen in VMware because of some of the uniqueness of tools that are out there, is again, this ability to potentially be completely agile in terms of what environment you're going to go into. VMware controlled the landscape with ESXi in terms of, if you want to use ESXi and have an API endpoint, you got to pay for it, right? I think what OpenShift and Kubernetes are doing is they're making this unique open ecosystem opportunity to be, no matter what distribution of Kubernetes you end up using, but I think OpenShift, again, is the best. You get to be in any environment and look exactly the same. AWS, Azure, on-prem, etc. And that speaks something, I think, that goes beyond what people traditionally think about. They usually go into a cloud and they want to get as, optimized and efficient and as baked in as they can into AWS or Azure or whatever. But the reality is most large companies aren't just in AWS. They're in multiple clouds and on-premise. And there are security standards, especially out of many other countries, that require you to have the ability to move your entire data center's worth of stuff without losing data from one environment to another in like minutes. Like, you have to be able to turn new systems over. How do you do that when you're so tightly married to AWS or so tightly married to Azure or so tightly married to your on-premise data center? You can't. You use OpenShift as the middle ground to all these environments to not only unify your skill sets, but also go, we can lift all of the content that we have, all of the applications, all the VMs that are living in one environment and move them to another environment. There is something really powerful there that I think doesn't get underscored hard enough. And I think, when I look forward to the next 24 to 36 months, I'm hopeful that we're going to see more code and content develop in this kind of way. I mean, we've already kind of seen it a little bit start to happen over the last several years, but it's like these small projects that are not talking to each other. For example, Scupper, it's a layer 7 network connectivity system to connect different OpenShift clusters together to make their network look flat so they can communicate workloads to each other, right? Portworx, seeing it do site-to-site replication across different clusters in real time synchronously. You start adding these pieces together, you go, where's all this going? And I think there's a bigger thing happening here that maybe is subconsciously we're all putting these pieces together. And so my hope is in 36 to 24 months, we'll see that vision become a reality.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. So last question. I guess what have we not talked about that folks need to know about or need to be thinking about when it comes to VMware exit strategy?
What have we not talked about? How important it is to plan it to be not this just dump everything off immediately. You can build your OpenShift clusters and you could start making your migration efforts and doing so in a very programmatic way. I think you buy yourself a lot of opportunity to tiptoe in while you move everything over. I think if you're waiting until we're 6 months away from a contract end with VMware, I think you're shooting yourself in the foot a little bit and leaving yourself in an opportunity where you're going to have to renew again. So the biggest thing I think that we haven't stated at all is if you're not planning 18 months out at least prior to your subscription renewal, I think you're not taking it seriously enough and you're just going to end up renewing. And then you're going to go, oh, this didn't make the dividends that I want fast enough, and you're just going to forget about it. If you want to make this move, I think use the opportunity that is now, which I've never said on this call, but I've said it in other capacities. People are considering the shift now. Other organizations are taking the time to do this, which means every organization has having to slow down a bit to make these migrations happen. Use the same opportunity to do the same thing for yourself. Don't wait until that window of opportunity closes.
Well, wise words. Thanks, Derrick. If someone listening or watching today wants to learn more about what Shadowsoft does or contact you, what's the best way to reach you?
Well, LinkedIn is the easy way to reach me. You can email me, dsutherland@shadowsoft.com, or they can talk to you, Ross.
Visit shadow-soft.com. Check out the website. There's some information around our service offerings for customers moving from VMware to OpenShift Virt. And head over to the contact button. You can reach out. Well, Derrick, appreciate you spending some time with me today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, have a good day, Ross.
All right, thanks.